I was about to buy my fiancée her dream home, then she demanded I add her brother to the deed. Turns out he was her ex this whole time. I'm 31 now, and I've been with my fiancée, Thea, she's 27, for a little over 5 years. We first crossed paths at this local restaurant where she just started working behind the counter. I had stopped by with a buddy of mine to grab some food, and the moment I saw her, I couldn't look away. She was absolutely beautiful, and her voice had this soft, kind tone that just pulled me in. While we were waiting on our order, I kept nudging my friend, whispering about how gorgeous she was and how I couldn't stop thinking about her even though we just met. He finally said, "Dude, just ask her out." But honestly, I was too nervous. Rejection scared the hell out of me. So instead of saying anything, I scribbled my name and number on a piece of paper and waited until our food was ready. When I went up to pay, I slipped her the note. She saw what I'd written and blushed a little, which gave me a tiny sliver of hope. That evening, she actually called me, and we ended up talking for hours. It was wild how easy it felt, like we'd known each other forever. Thea is the first woman I've ever been with who makes me feel genuinely happy. She has this way of lighting up my whole day, just by smiling. My parents and my sister met her not long after we started dating, and they love her just as much as I do. Now, just to give you a little background, Thea and I come from very different walks of life. Her childhood was rough. Her mom abandoned her as a baby, no name, no info, not even a birthday. She never got adopted and bounced from one foster home to another, most of which were pretty awful by the sound of it. The only family she ever mentioned was her cousin brother, Kyle. Apparently, he didn't even know she existed until she was 16. Once he found out, he got in touch, and they've been incredibly close ever since. From the very beginning, Thea told me flat out that Kyle was the most important person in her life. I didn't take it personally at the time. I have an older sister I'm close to too, so I understood that kind of sibling bond. But things got tricky. She would cancel plans with me last minute if Kyle wanted to hang out, no matter what we had lined up. She once told me they both had separation anxiety, and it showed. We'd be talking about taking a weekend trip together, just the two of us, and then out of nowhere, she'd suggest bringing her brother along. There was one time during a short vacation that Kyle called her out of the blue, and she got visibly stressed, saying she needed to rush home because he wanted her there. She'd made it clear that he was her number one, and honestly, it left me feeling kind of uneasy, like no matter how serious our relationship got, I'd always come second to her brother. It felt like I was constantly competing for her attention, which was a weird place to be. Even during our dates, Kyle would call, and she'd take the call every time, sometimes staying on the phone with him for 15 or 30 minutes while I just sat there awkwardly. Back when I first met her, Thea was living in a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. Kyle would always find reasons to crash there. I remember once I FaceTimed her and saw him lying in bed right next to her. It made me incredibly uncomfortable. I brought it up, and she explained that he usually slept on the couch but didn't want to be alone that night because of a bad breakup. I told her it still didn't sit right with me. Sharing a bed with another man, even if he was her cousin, just crossed a line for me. She argued that the couch was uncomfortable and her bed had more space. I pointed out how odd it was that he kept crashing at her place more often than I did, even though I was her boyfriend. Instead of staying with a friend, he always seemed to choose her. Thea brushed it off, said I was making it a bigger deal than it was, and told me I couldn't really understand because I wasn't as close to my sister as she was to her brother. Compared to Thea, I had it easy growing up. I came from a well-off family, had 2 loving parents, and a good relationship with my older sister. So when Thea opened up about her past, it honestly broke my heart. No kid should have to grow up the way she did. That's why I've always tried to pour as much love and support into her as I could. Things were going so well between us that we decided to move in together after about 7 months of dating. She told me her lease was about to end, and since I already owned my home and was paying the mortgage, she asked if she could move in. I said yes. From the start, I've supported her financially. I have a great job pulling in a 6-figure salary, and she knew that. At first, I thought about asking her to chip in on rent, but I let it go. She was still in school, and I figured she had enough on her plate. I covered everything, her books, groceries, gas, daily needs, you name it. I didn't love being the only one paying for everything, but I cared about her and wanted to help. I kept telling myself that once she graduated and we were both earning steady incomes, it would all even out. But every now and then, we'd butt heads. A big part of that was me feeling like, since I was the one footing the bill, I should have more say in the big decisions. One weekend, Thea invited Kyle over because she said he wanted to hang out and get drunk, and she hoped we'd bond. I agreed and even picked up some beer for him. But when he arrived, he completely ignored me. Walked right past me and gave Thea a hug that honestly lasted way too long. After that, she introduced us. I tried to be friendly and smiled, but he didn't even react. Then he plopped down on our couch and straight up told Thea to go get him a drink. And I mean literally ordered her. I was stunned. I'd never spoken to her like that, not once. That whole evening, her brother treated me like trash. At one point, he looked around our place and made some snide comment about how I probably mooched off my dad for everything. I calmly told him I worked hard through college, landed a solid job, and was paying the mortgage all by myself. He scoffed and immediately started bragging about how he'd just gotten promoted. For context, the guy had been working at a restaurant for 8 years and had recently been made a manager. Thea and I congratulated him, even though, deep down, I was still trying to process how rude he had been the entire night. Kyle ignored me again like I wasn't even there and started telling Thea how he wanted to take her out to dinner. He said it had been forever since just the two of them had hung out, and he really missed their late-night drives. Thea smiled and agreed, and the two of them started reminiscing about their old times together. I just sat there feeling wildly out of place. It was uncomfortable hearing all of that, like I was a third wheel in my own home. Thea eventually noticed that I was quiet and clearly not enjoying myself, so we slipped into our bedroom to talk. But I guess we were in there too long, because suddenly her brother barged in, shouting her name like the house was on fire. He said he missed her and asked her to come back out. She tried to calm him down, saying we'd be there in a minute, but he kept pushing, asking her to hurry up. At that point, I snapped and told him to back off. I was beyond irritated with how clingy he was, and I honestly couldn't understand how Thea didn't see how strange it was. After we talked things through, I told her we could go back out. I didn't want to be the reason she stayed away from her brother. She stopped off at the bathroom first, so I waited in the hallway. That's when I heard Kyle yelling at the TV like a maniac, clearly wasted. I glanced over and realized the guy had been steadily drinking since he arrived and was now about 6 beers in. When Thea came out of the bathroom, he started telling her how he wished they'd just gone to a bar instead and had a proper night out, because apparently sitting at home was boring. She could tell he was drunk too, and gently suggested he lie down for a bit, especially since he had to drive later. And then, out of nowhere, he started ranting about how much he hated that she was with me. He said he wished I had never come into their lives. That was the final straw. I didn't care how drunk he was, I'd had enough. I asked him point blank what his problem was. I mean, what kind of brother is this involved in his sister's life? Instead of answering like a normal person, he flew into a rage and lunged at me. I'm 6 feet 3 inches and he's nowhere near my size, so I had to seriously hold myself back. Thea was crying and begging me not to hurt him while he kept hurling insults at me. I finally gave him a small push, just one, and he dropped out cold. Thea freaked out, screaming that I'd killed him, but he was just unconscious. She checked to make sure he was still breathing, and he was. I told her to just let him sleep it off on the couch. He'd be fine by morning. Then she turned to me, eyes full of shock and anger, and told me what I'd done was unforgivable. I looked her in the eye and said, "If that's how you feel, you're free to leave." Her eyes welled up with tears, but I was too exhausted, physically and emotionally, to argue. I just went up to bed and crashed. The next morning, Kyle was gone. When I asked Thea about it, she told me he had asked her to apologize to me for how things went down and that he wasn't going to press charges or anything. I let out a bitter laugh and told her he was lucky I wasn't the one filing charges, since he was the one who attacked me while drunk. She brushed it off and told me she was sorry for losing it the night before. I accepted her apology, but things weren't quite the same after that. Kyle made a point to avoid me completely from that moment on. Thea still went to see him every weekend, but he never showed up around me again. By the 3rd year of my relationship with Thea, I was feeling worn out. I'd been the only one carrying the financial load in the house. She expected me to cover every single school expense, even though she had her own savings from various part-time jobs. What got to me was that she started acting like she was entitled to my support, like it was a given. When she finally landed an internship, I was hopeful that things would shift, that she'd start contributing more. But instead of helping with bills, she went out and spent her money on high-end stuff like fancy handbags and yet another pair of shoes, even though she rarely wore the ones she already had. Meanwhile, I was still stuck paying for all the basics: food, gas, utilities, everything. We started fighting more often. Our arguments usually boiled down to her saying I shouldn't control how she spends her money, and me calling her out for acting like a spoiled kid I had to take care of. I wasn't trying to be mean, but I was frustrated beyond words. After she graduated, she didn't get a job for almost a year. For the first 5 months, she tried hard applying everywhere, but all the rejections hit her hard and tanked her self-esteem. I understood that, but what bugged me was how she refused to even pick up a part-time job during that time, even though I kept suggesting it. And then there was Kyle again. Even though she wasn't making a dime, she kept sending him money, sometimes hundreds every month. When I questioned it, she'd say he needed help, and that I made enough money anyway, so I shouldn't be selfish. That really lit a fire under me. Not only was she spending my money without asking, she expected me to be okay with it. I'm not going to pretend I handled things perfectly. My resentment had been building for a long time, and it all came out one night. It was the evening before her student loan and phone bill were due. She called me asking for help again, and I just exploded. I told her she was ungrateful, that she used me for money and gave nothing in return. I called our relationship a joke and said I deserved better, a real partner, not someone who acted like a dependent teenager. She broke down crying, said she didn't know I felt that way and promised she'd do better. That night, for the first time, she actually seemed to understand how much pressure I was under. And to her credit, she followed through. She started applying for jobs again, stopped sending money to Kyle, and eventually found a steady gig. She even began contributing to our bills. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were equals again, and that made all the difference. So last September, I proposed to her. I figured we'd tie the knot this coming June. She said yes, and we shared the news on social media, excited to start this new chapter together. But just recently, she was planning to visit Kyle for the weekend, and I noticed something strange: she wasn't wearing her engagement ring. When I asked about it, she said her brother was really sensitive and that she planned to tell him about the engagement gently, in her own time. I chuckled and asked Thea why all of this had to be such a big deal, but she shut me down pretty quickly. She told me not to interfere, reminded me that Kyle was her family and that she knew how to handle him. And honestly, she had a point, so I let it go. Around that time, I wanted to do something meaningful for both of us. I ran through my finances and realized I was in a good enough place to buy a new house. My current home was already paid off, so I figured I could rent it out and make some extra income on the side. My plan was to buy a new place for Thea and me, a fresh start, something we could build a future in together. I even started working with a realtor to scout out good options. When I shared the news with Thea, she was completely surprised, in a good way. She wrapped her arms around me, beaming, and said she couldn't wait to start the next chapter of our lives. Over the following months, we toured tons of homes. Thea had a lot of opinions and took her time before settling on one, but eventually, we found a beautiful place that checked all our boxes. It had a huge backyard, which we both wanted, and it was only about an hour and a half from my office. She mostly works from home, so the location worked perfectly for both of us. Since I was buying the house for us, I thought it was only fair to put both our names on the deed. It seemed like the right move as we were planning to get married anyway. But then Thea threw a curveball. I wasn't prepared for what she said next. She told me she wasn't comfortable unless her name and Kyle's name were included on the deed. I was stunned. I stared at her and asked if she was seriously suggesting we put her brother's name on our house. She didn't flinch. She explained that, since she had no assets of her own, no parents, no inheritance, she felt incredibly insecure going into marriage with nothing. She wanted to be on the deed to feel secure. That part, I could understand. But then she said Kyle should be on it too, because he was her family and would soon be mine too. I refused, flat out, and we got into a huge argument over it. In the heat of the moment, I told her that she always bringing up Kyle was getting exhausting. I told her that, yeah, I had a sibling too, but her relationship with her so-called brother just didn't feel right. It was crossing boundaries. Hearing that hit her hard. She started crying and walked out of the room. Later that night, she brought it up again. She insisted that adding her and Kyle to the deed was the right thing to do, that it meant something to her, symbolically, emotionally, everything. I kept saying no. She kept pushing. It became this constant cycle. Every few days, the conversation would circle back to it. She'd get emotional, and I'd feel more and more confused and uneasy. I couldn't make sense of why this was even a discussion. Then, just last week, something unexpected happened. I ran into Thea's best friend, Betty, at a coffee shop near my office. She said she was there for an interview close by. I'd met Betty a few times. She and Thea go way back, all the way to college. Thea doesn't have many close friends, but Betty's definitely one of them. She congratulated me on the upcoming wedding and teased me a bit about getting hitched. I gave a half-hearted smile. She asked about the wedding plans, and I fumbled through my answers. Truthfully, I'd been second-guessing everything lately. Between all the fights and the constant tension about the house deed, I'd been asking myself if I even made the right choice proposing. I hadn't told anyone, not my parents, not even my sister, because I didn't want to taint their opinion of Thea. But Betty picked up on my hesitation and gently pushed for more. I don't know what came over me, but I ended up opening up to her. I told her everything. About the house. About Thea insisting Kyle's name be included. About how I couldn't make sense of it. Betty's eyes went wide. She looked genuinely shocked and said, "That's really strange." For the first time, I felt like someone was finally validating what I'd been feeling. I wasn't crazy. It was weird. Then Betty hesitated and asked if I knew the full story about Thea and Kyle. I said no, shaking my head, confused. That's when she dropped the bomb. Apparently, Kyle isn't really Thea's brother. They're not related at all. Back when they were growing up in the foster system, they met each other as kids, both orphans. They got close really fast and started telling people they were siblings. It gave them a sense of stability, something to cling to when the rest of their world was constantly changing. And honestly, I get it. It probably gave them some comfort during a really dark time. But as they got older, their relationship raised eyebrows. People started asking questions. Kyle, in particular, would meddle in Thea's relationships, and her exes didn't like him being around so much. That's when Thea started telling people that Kyle was her cousin instead of her brother. It made things easier. People assumed they were family and didn't ask questions. Betty said Kyle's girlfriends had issues with Thea too, but once they were told she was his sister, it made things less awkward. As Betty explained all this, I just sat there, completely floored. My mind was spinning. Shock, confusion, a little bit of betrayal, it all hit me at once. I told Betty I had no idea. I had been under the impression, this entire time, that Kyle was Thea's actual brother. Betty seemed surprised by that. She assumed I already knew. She figured that since I was engaged to Thea, she would have come clean about something so important. But she hadn't. Not once. Betty said she always found their relationship a little too close, but it wasn't her place to judge, so she kept her thoughts to herself. I appreciated her honesty, but now I was left with way more questions than answers. Ever since that conversation, I've been walking around in a daze. I've been trying to act normal around Thea, keeping up appearances, but deep down, I feel sick. I don't even know how to bring this up without blowing everything apart. I don't know how long she's been keeping this secret from me, or worse, why she kept it at all. And now I'm seriously wondering if this might be the end for us. Because if I can't trust her to be honest about something so fundamental, I don't know how we build a future together. I've been wrestling with the idea of ending things with Thea, my fiancée, ever since I found out she'd been lying to me about her so-called brother. I keep wondering, do I give her the benefit of the doubt? We've been together for years, and I've invested so much into this relationship. But at the same time, how do you move forward with someone you can't trust? I really needed help, so I turned to Reddit and asked for advice. Update 1. Thanks to everyone who responded. Your comments gave me a lot to think about, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could see a way forward. I've always tried to handle tough situations by staying calm, keeping perspective, and not reacting out of pure emotion. But this had me all twisted up. Still, after sitting with it, I realized most of the people encouraging me to walk away were right. It's probably the best decision I can make. But before I go cutting ties completely, I need to talk to Thea. I need to hear her side of the story, because if I don't, this will haunt me for the rest of my life. I also decided to come clean to my parents. I told them everything, the lies, the fight about the house deed, all of it. Their reaction matched the comments I was getting online. They were relieved I hadn't married Thea yet or tied us together financially. They were clear, they didn't want me to go through with the wedding, and they supported whatever decision I made from here. Update 2. Yesterday, I finally sat down and confronted Thea. It was nerve-wracking, but I knew I had to do it, not just for closure, but for myself. I told her straight up that I had spoken to Betty and that she'd told me the truth about Kyle. Thea looked stunned. Her eyes widened, and she nervously asked what exactly I meant. So I laid it out. I told her I knew that Kyle wasn't her cousin, wasn't her brother, wasn't even family. I told her I knew the truth, that they met in foster care, called each other siblings for comfort, and kept up the act well into adulthood. She froze, her eyes darting around the room. She stammered a bit, but eventually admitted it. She confessed that the whole brother thing had been a lie from the start. She tried to justify it by explaining how, back when they were just kids, they needed that connection, something to anchor them through the chaos of foster care. Over time, they kept up the lie because people didn't understand their closeness, and it made things easier to say they were cousins. I listened, but it didn't make me feel better. I wasn't angry about Kyle not being her biological brother, I was angry that she had kept this lie going for years. We were about to get married, and she still hadn't told me. When I brought up her insisting on putting Kyle's name on our house deed, she broke down into this emotional plea. She said Kyle had always been her rock, and including him on the deed would have been a symbolic gesture of how much he meant to her. I told her, plain and simple, that I was supposed to be her family now. I was the one she was about to marry, not Kyle. But instead of planning a future with me, she was busy prioritizing a guy she grew up with and pretending he was her brother. She tried to tell me their relationship was purely platonic, but honestly, I couldn't take it anymore. I laughed bitterly and said, "There's nothing platonic about the way Kyle acts around you." And then I asked her flat out if she had been sleeping with him. She got defensive at first, swearing nothing like that had ever happened. But after I pressed her harder, she finally broke. Through tears, she admitted that Kyle had been her first boyfriend. They had dated briefly as teenagers, and yes, they had been each other's firsts. According to her, it ended quickly once they realized they weren't right for each other, and they decided to stay close as siblings. But at that point, I was done listening to excuses. I told her I was disgusted, not because of what had happened when they were kids, but because she had chosen to hide the truth all this time. She looked me in the eyes, crying harder now, and said this was exactly why she'd kept it a secret. She knew people wouldn't understand. Then she tried to guilt-trip me. She brought up her mother abandoning her, said I was now doing the same thing, leaving her when she needed me most. She told me she couldn't live without me. But I didn't budge. I told her the trust was gone. It was over. Then I asked for the engagement ring back. It wasn't just any ring, it had belonged to my grandmother. It was a family heirloom, and I had given it to her with my mother's blessing, thinking we were building a life together. But now, I didn't want her walking away with it. She refused at first. Said it was hers now. That I'd given it to her, and she was keeping it. That's when I lost my patience. I told her what she had done amounted to emotional catfishing. She had taken advantage of me, used me financially and emotionally, while keeping this massive lie going. I said she wasn't leaving until I had the ring back in my hand. Reluctantly, while sobbing and calling me heartless, she took it off and handed it over. I told her she needed to pack her things and be out of my house within the hour. She begged, pleaded, promised she'd change, but my mind was made up. The person I thought I knew had been a mask, and I wanted nothing more to do with her. She tried calling Kyle to come pick her up, but when he found out I knew the truth, he wanted no part of it. I guess he figured if he showed up at my house, things wouldn't end well. So she called an Uber. As she left, she told me she was sorry and said she'd wait for me. I didn't respond. I just shut the door. The past few days have been a storm of emotions. I feel hurt, betrayed, and oddly, relieved. It breaks my heart that the woman I once thought was my soulmate turned out to be someone I didn't even know. And yeah, starting over in my 30s feels daunting. But thank God I found all this out before we signed the marriage papers or bought a house together. It could have been so much worse. Update 3. To everyone who messaged me with kind words or shared your own stories, thank you. I truly mean it. Reading your advice and encouragement has made a real difference for me during this rough patch. I've decided to go to therapy. A lot of you recommended it, and you're right, it's time I deal with this head-on instead of just pushing the pain aside. I know the hurt will fade eventually, but right now, yeah, it still stings. Thankfully, my sister and my parents have been there for me through all of this. They check in regularly and have made sure I'm okay. I've blocked Thea on everything. I've changed my door locks and, just to be safe, installed cameras around the house. I don't think she or Kyle will come back, but I'm not taking any chances. This will be my final update. I'm ready to move on and leave this behind. I don't want to keep reliving her betrayal anymore.